Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Today, our guest is Dr. Tommy Watson. He's a leading authority on resilience, change, motivation, and leadership. He has a true rags to riches story. Against the odds, he found football in high school and eventually won a college football scholarship. Known as Dr. Inspiration, he travels around the world sharing his message of the resilience of champions. Dr. Inspiration, welcome to the show today.
Dr. Middleton, great job with that intro. I appreciate you having me. It's an honor to be on.
Oh, thank you so much. Hey, look here. I know you grew up in 5 Points in Denver, Colorado. Take us back and tell us about growing up in 5 Points.
Yeah, again, it's a pleasure and honor to be on with you, Dr. Middleton. You know, five Points in Denver, Colorado is the first Black neighborhood in the history of Colorado. So its origins go back until the 1800s. You had Madam C.J. Walker. She grew up there, but she lived there, for a period of time. Her brother was there. So great place. In the 60s, 50s and 60s, it was known as the Harlem of the West. So it was a thriving Black community where you had a lot of action going on. And then the 70s came around where 5 Points then became a place where you had a lot of drugs. And my parents, growing up in that situation, they ended up becoming heroin addicts and shoplifters. So, growing up as a kid, I was growing up, parents who were drug addicts and shoplifters. And by the time I finished high school, my mother and father had been arrested a total of 121 times. So you can imagine having your parents been incarcerated that many times caused a lot of disruption from your life. So, as kids, my siblings and I, there's 6 of us, Dr. Milton, we've never all lived together growing up as kids. Been in different foster homes, crisis centers, motel rooms, living with different family and friends. I met my oldest brother by pure coincidence in a foster home in 2nd grade where he was visiting with his adopted mother. My 2 siblings have to remember him, and then in the 80s and 5 Points, when the Crips and Bloods were being run out of LA, they migrated to Denver, Colorado. So as a 3rd grader, the gang life looked very appealing to me because they seemed to have it going on. They seemed to have great connections. And I was a young man who was looking for connection with something. And I was pretty fortunate that my aunt got me involved in basketball. And the game of basketball saved my life. What the game of basketball did for me is it gave me a chance to dream beyond my circumstances, because my circumstances were telling me that I was going to be in prison, graveyard, or, just in all these negative circumstances at a very early age. But that dream of basketball gave me a chance to dream beyond my circumstances, which was very, very critical for me and at that particular age group as well, because that dream never left me. And, in 7th grade, Dr. Milton, I ended up in a motel room. We got kicked out of our house in front of all our friends, ended up in our 7th motel room where we stayed my entire 8th grade year of school. And that dream of going on to play professional sports never left me. So I was still striving for it while living in a motel room with 9 people. I was still had that dream of going to the NBA or NFL. So I kept going, ended up getting a scholarship to a private suburban Denver high school after my mother and father and going back to prison again. My grandmother took in my younger brother and sister and I took 3 city buses one way to this high school every day in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, in hopes that I was going to eventually get to the NFL or NBA to live out that dream. Went to the high school. By my senior year of that high school, my grandmother had developed Alzheimer's disease, had to be placed into a nursing home. And by the end of my senior year of high school, I was actually homeless, sleeping on a family floor of a family friend, where I spent the last 6 months, and then eventually left Denver, Colorado, left 5 Points, an area that I loved greatly 30 years ago, to go play football for University of Minnesota. And I never moved back home.
Okay. Well, that's a lot for us to unpack here. So I want to roll back just a little bit here. So as a youngster with the drugs in your neighborhood and your parents' arrest, do you recall how that made you feel?
Yeah, I was a very angry kid, because one of the things that happened during this time was there was a lot of physical violence from my dad towards my mother. And I remember just becoming very, very angry at my father for doing my mother like that. That anger trickled over to the school building where I became a bully in certain instances. I didn't respond well to my teachers. I had a learning disability that, I didn't know how to cope with at the time, didn't really know I even had it at the time. So it was a lot of anger. It was a lot of sadness. It was a lot of depression. It was a lot of yearning to connect with something. That's why the gang thing became so appealing, because I was looking for that, and it was something I wanted.
Yeah. So you said you found sports. Is that what kept you out of the gangs, or did something else? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it was very important to me to have a dream that was bigger than my circumstances. And for me, it was only going to be sports, because again, at the time, growing up in Denver, Colorado, the two perspectives I had of success were the black men who were on the corner and gangs and drugs and stuff like that. And then occasionally, obviously, the Denver Bronco players who looked like me playing on television. So that dream of trying to get there where they were had to supersede the dream that was over, the vision that was over here, though.
Gotcha.
So that was very important to have that.
Right. So looking at sports, and I want you to think about it, while you were in middle school and high school, not college yet. Well, let's include all of them. What did you draw from athletics? What did you get from athletics?
I'll even go back to when I jumped into basketball in third grade, which was a pretty critical moment. One of the first things I got, Dr. Middleton, was a guy who became kind of a mentor to me. My basketball coach, A.B. Maxey in Denver, Colorado, became kind of a guy that we began to look up to. The other thing I began to get is I got a connection with a group of guys who had similar goals and dreams to get to the NFL or NBA.
Right.
And then I had a connection beyond what was going on with the gangs. I had that same connection there. So that was very, very important for me to have, because those are some of the things that draw a lot of kids at that age group into gangs. It looks very appealing. They have a lot of older guys who become kind of mentors to them. And then you get a chance to get with a group of guys who have similar goals and dreams, not often, some of the most positive things, but that draws a lot of people there. So sports became that thing for me, and it gave me that. And then over the years, what I started to acquire was a great deal of discipline, showing up to the gym early, going there early, staying there later, and then just working my butt off to succeed in sports. And it really helped me over the years to become a pretty good athlete.
Yeah. So you eventually gravitated toward football. Right. Why football? Why did you make that choice?
That's a great question. So the high school that was recruiting me and my comrades from the inner cities, suburban, predominantly white Catholic school in the suburbs, they had a great football program. And their program was struggling, but they noticed that in the inner cities, there was a plethora of us who were great athletes. Right. Who just happened to be basketball players. So the notion of the coach was, if I can take these basketball players and bring them out to the school and make them football players, we'd dominate. Right. And that's what we did. By the time I was a senior in high school, was ranked number 3 in the country. I think 11 of the guys of the team of 27 went on to play Division I football. So we became very, very dominant. So in order to go to that high school out there, long story short, you had to play football.
Right. So look, how are your academics?
You know what? That's a great question. Academically, I struggled big time. I go around the country sharing. I always show my report card my senior year of high school. And it was about a 1.7, 1/4, 2.0. So I was really about a C- student, struggling. So, but I also tell my kids, though, had I been in a different situation, maybe I would have been a B or A student. I don't know. Right. But there were so many things that were taking place outside of my life that were calling to my attention to that I couldn't really focus on school the way I needed to. And then I was missing a lot of the academic skill sets because I had missed so much school as a youngster growing up. I went to 5 different elementary schools I went to 4 different elementary schools within 1 year and 6 different elementary schools by the time I was in 6th grade. So my academic career was constantly being disrupted by life outside of school. So there were some basic foundational skills that I didn't necessarily have. And I didn't necessarily get until later on.
Understood. Before we leave high school, I want to ask you another question about sports and football in particular. First of all, what position did you play on the
running back?
Running back. Okay. Many of us have never been in a huddle. Yeah. And football players, all teams, sports go into a huddle. So take us into one of those huddle experiences that you may find memorable, if there's any.
Yeah, I've had a chance to be in a lot of huddles over the years. As a high schooler, we got a chance to play in front of 10,000 fans. As a collegiate athlete, I was playing to 115,000 fans in Michigan. So one of the things that really takes place in huddles is it gives you a chance to kind of just calm your nerves, reconnect, see who's with you in the battle, get a game plan, get assurance from your friends, and then you have to go out and execute. So that's one of the greatest things that takes place with a hustle. I mean, in a huddle. You get a chance to pause. No matter what took place before with the previous play, whether it was a horrible play or a great play, we're now on to this next play that's going to take place here. I need to see all of my teammates eye to eye to know that we're all in this together. And then when we leave that huddle, I'm trusting and believing that everyone out there is going to go out and execute what they have to do for us to do whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. So this is the same thing in life as well. We got to have those people where we can huddle around and believe in us and go out and execute.
Yeah, that's a great principle there that you just shared, is that, I mean, we all going to face something in life, but if you have your team, whatever it is, you said, settle down and come up with a plan of action. I like that. So now, you mentioned the University of Michigan a moment ago, but did you attend Michigan or Minnesota as an undergraduate?
University of Minnesota. We played at Michigan. I played against Tom Brady when I was actually in college as well.
Okay. So when the University of Minnesota came calling, how did you feel? I mean, take us there. What was your reaction? Were there other schools you were looking at? Yeah. Did you feel ready for this? Take us there.
Yeah. So it's funny, when the University of Minnesota came calling, I went running. I had no desire whatsoever to go play in Minnesota. All I knew about Minnesota was it was really cold. Mm-hmm. So most of my time, I had over 32 scholarships. I was an All-American football player coming out of high school. So I had 32 scholarship offers. But one of the school that I committed to, I loved dearly, was TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. I remember going down there, seeing all the African Americans doing well, and I was saying, hey, this is where I want to go to school at. And I had only taken 2 visits at that particular time, and my coach was like, are you sure you're ready to commit this early? And I was like, yeah. So I committed to TCU. About a month later, the coach left there and went to University of Minnesota, and Jim Wacker was a great guy, great coach. Now, mind you, when I was going through the recruiting process, my mother was in prison, so I was going through this by myself. I was literally taking these trips with no parental guidance, and I was going off of where I had the most fun. And I had the most fun in Fort Worth, Texas, and great guys, and there was a lot of African Americans there, and that's where I wanted to go to school at. I didn't know much about the academics. I didn't know much about the careers that were going to take place afterwards, but I just knew that I had a great time down there, and there was a lot of African Americans. So when the coach left there and went to the University of Minnesota, at that time we had created a bond, and I simply followed him to the University of Minnesota. So that's how I ended up there.
I see. Yeah. So you must have done well academically. But first of all, how did your sports career go at Minnesota?
I ended up getting a back injury my junior year after being the MVP of the team. And so it went downhill, and I had to end up turning to academics, though, finish off, though. But even in the process, my grades were still not good. I was a really good athlete, and being a good athlete back then superseded and I even say to a degree today, superseded a lot of the grades.
Yeah, got you. So, but you turned it around. At what point, can you remember when you said to yourself, I'm going to turn this thing on, I'm going to apply? Can you work us through how you got from where you were and to where you ultimately got as a doctor?
Yeah. So it was probably into my sophomore year of college. I had been hanging out, having a good time with all my friends. I didn't know. I mean, it was one thing being an athlete in high school, but it was another level being an athlete in college. I mean, especially at a Big Ten school, 50,000 students, and my priorities were not where they should have been. There was a lot of hanging out, a lot of stuff going on. My grades were barely on the wire. I was barely staying eligible. I had a couple Fs. And I remember the athletic director, Dr. McKinley Boston at the time, brought me and one of my teammates in, and he said, hey, I'm giving you guys one more chance over the summer to get your grades together, or you guys will not be back in the fall. And I was like, whoa. And I knew what I had just left in Denver, Colorado. So for me, he didn't have to say anything back to me. He didn't have to say anything else to me, though. I jumped into sessions 1 and 2. I worked my butt off, had the highest GPA I'd ever had at the University of Minnesota. My other comrade, who was a really good friend of mine, great athlete, he didn't put forth the effort he needed to. And we came back in the fall. He was not there, but I was there. So I began to, get a little sense of what it was like to be just a student as well, not just an athlete. But that came home when I was actually, after I got hurt. And once I got injured, I had to really start thinking about what was life going to be like for me. Because again, I wasn't going back to the environment that I left in Denver. As a matter of fact, before my injury, I was just in a drive-by shooting in Denver where I was almost killed. And I kept telling myself I can't go back to that environment. So after that injury, it's probably the time where it really, really became real to me that I had to leave the University of Minnesota with a degree, and I honed in and did that.
Yeah. So I want to isolate that for a moment. Where do you think, because there's a lot happening, I'm going to call it internally, so a lot of happening in you. Where is this coming from, you think? Is it just, I mean, is this external? Is it the injury? Is it the shooting in 5 Points, or where is it coming from for you?
It was everything. It was the fear. It was the fear factor. It was all the hungry days and nights I spent growing up in Denver, Colorado. It was the days and being in the foster home, not knowing where my siblings were. It was the drive-by shootings. It was all the uncertainty. It was everything in a nutshell that I didn't want to experience again.
Yeah.
I have to get this education. Again, it went back to, my early memories. And I didn't necessarily know this at the time, but every time I was able to dream big, I was able to supersede my circumstances. And I think that is a very, very important principle people got to get. You can be in any circumstances that may be, dire. But if you can get to a place where you can just dream just a little bit bigger than those circumstances, you can do some amazing things. So one of the things I used to do as a kid, I tell people it is very, very important for you to be able to see the there that is there when there is nothing there but you there. You have to be able to see the there that is there when there's nothing there but you there. So as a kid, when I was growing up in 5 Points, all these gangs, all the stuff around me were telling me that I was not going to succeed. I would dream every day about being a professional athlete, living in a beautiful neighborhood, driving a nice car, wonderful family. So I was constantly doing that when there was nothing in the room but me there.
Wow.
So that's important to be able to do, get beyond your circumstance. So when I was in college, and after the injury took place, dreams became about what life was going to be like in terms of having a degree and being able to wear a suit. I wanted to wear a suit. One of the things growing up in Denver, Colorado, my mother and father were boosters and shoplifters. They would often sell clothing to the business people in the community. And oftentimes these guys would wear these nice suits. They would smell good. And I would tell myself, I want to be like that. I want to be like that one day. Yeah. So that was my goal and my dream, to be able to wear a nice suit and have on some good smelling cologne.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, you're looking good now, Dr. Inspiration, that's for sure. So then getting your undergraduate degree for the vast majority of college graduates, once they get their BA or BS or whatever, they stop. Right. But you didn't stop. What kept you going?
Yeah. And again, it went back to knowing that I didn't have any safety nets beyond anything waiting for me in Denver. So I said, I got to go back and get some more education. So I went back. And actually, I think I had gotten fired from a job first before I actually went back. But I had been considering going back. But once I got fired from that job, I said, you know what? I don't want anyone to ever have that type of control over my life again. So I need to go maximize education so it'll give me some additional opportunities. So I went and got my master's. I went back and got my advanced graduate degree. I went back and got my doctorate degree. I was a principal at the time, and people were saying, you don't need a doctorate degree, you're a principal. I said, nah, for me, I'm going to maximize every piece of education I got that's going to give me options, though.
Yeah.
So I was always big on options and not just being limited to just my bachelor's or my master's. I wanted to be able to apply for any position that I wanted, whether it be the college president. Doesn't necessarily grant me the chance to get it, though. At least I'll be able to be at a place where I can at least be considered for the position, though.
Have you ever regretted investing all of those years into a master's and into a doctorate education? Have you ever had regrets about that?
I've never had, because for me, I always went in with the, once I got fired from my job, I had a plan. And part of my plan was to maximize education to get me there. So I always saw the education I was obtaining was helping me build my business plan for where I was as a doctor. I told an aunt recently, well, actually a couple of years ago, I told her I didn't even remember getting my master's degree because I was so focused on being a doctor.
Yeah.
So I went through my bachelor's, my master's, my advanced grad degree. I didn't remember those last two degrees as much as when I got the doctorate. When I got the doctorate, I was like, this is what I've been shooting for. Because there were a couple things that opened up more doors to me, but it also gave me a chance to have a voice where people would listen to me. So I'm not an ego-driven guy. I don't need you to call me doctor all the time like that. However, I worked hard for it, and definitely, in the places where I need to be called doctor, I want that to take place. However, it also gave me a chance to go back and inspire our young people in terms of what they can do. I remember I was in Omaha, Nebraska a couple of years ago. I was speaking at this prison, and I was talking to a bunch of gang members. And one of the gang members, he said, I get it now. He said, "You doctor, but you sound like the homies. I can do that." I said, "You darn right you can do it." I said, "There's nothing stopping you."
Yeah.
So they were able to bridge the gap that I was from the same place they were at, but also had obtained the amount of education that was, an education that only 2% of people had, and that it was still doable for them as well if you wanted to accomplish it. That's what I wanted to see.
Yeah. Gotcha. So what was it like being principal of a school, high school in Minnesota? What was it like for you?
I was at the elementary.
What were your students like, and how did you work with them? And
I was at the elementary school level. It was a great, I'd worked really, really hard to become a school principal. I had a school that was low income in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Loved it. I loved my students. I loved the family. So I was a principal who went above and beyond my work. So I was a principal who went to the backyard barbecues, went to the birthday parties on the weekends. I was out canvassing the community, knocking on doors before I actually stepped foot in the principal's office, just getting to know the community and what have you. So my family's students were great. One of the challenges I faced was I brought in this great diverse staff my first year as a principal. The second year, due to budget cuts in the district, I lost a third of my staff.
Ooh.
And had obtained a staff that was giving to me, that I inherited, that did not want to work with the kids and families that I've been working with and worked so hard to establish with, that it became a great fight over the next 4 years when I was a principal there. And then eventually, having my superintendent, my supervisor tell me to acquiesce to some of the low standards that they were having for kids and everything else. I said, I eventually said, I'm going to leave and just do my own thing and do something from the outside. But my time there, I had a significant impact. I'm really close with and this wasn't all my staff. It was just, a few of them that made it really, really tough. But I'm good friends with a lot of my, former staff members, family members. I see a lot of my students doing well to this day. A lot of them reach out to me. In fact, a lot of them are parents and everything today, and they reach out to me on Facebook saying, "Hey, Dr. Watson, I still remember when you were telling us to do blah, 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 blah." So it's a beautiful thing. So I think I had the impact that I needed to have. I wish I could have stayed longer. However, I think God had a plan for me to take that message and those things that I was doing and do them on a broader scale, which I'm doing now.
Yeah. So in a high school or in a public school, does the school have a duty to make sure that children are safe and, not free from, but should be free from bullying and intimidation? Does the school have that obligation?
Absolutely. I think as adults, we all have that obligation to deal with any kids, whether it be in the school or church or at workplace, in our community. I think we should all have that responsibility kind of placed on our shoulders. In our schools, we definitely have it because, those kids are with us 6 hours a day. We want to make sure that those kids are feeling safe. They're feeling encouraged. They're feeling hopeful, that they can achieve their goals and dreams. And the funny thing about my school, we only had one suspension the entire year. I was kind of like Joe Clark. I loved all my students. During the day, I was really tough on them. But in the beginning of the school day, every student who came in my building, 700 kids, received a high five from Dr. Watson. On the way out, no matter what they did or didn't do, they received a high five on the way home from Dr. Watson with encouragement to come back and do it better the next day. So I was a principal that was really beloved by the students and families, and the vast majority of my teachers as well. That little group of educators who made it tough for me, their issue was they didn't want to go above and beyond like I was asking for our students, which made their jobs difficult and made mine as difficult as well, because I wasn't going to back up on the fact those kids could achieve.
Right. So what would you say to a parent today who says that, she sends her kid to school and her kid comes back and report that she has been bullied, that she has been threatened, by someone, that they were going to kill her, and the school took no action? What would you say to a parent in that situation?
Well, first of all, before we get there, I tell all parents, you got to make sure you're being involved. Don't just simply send your kids to school, whether it be high school, middle school, elementary school, and don't make a connection with the educators. You should know who your child's teachers are. Come by, visit, give some time if you can to the school so that other people are involved. Go to the events beyond the school so you're getting to make a connection with the community as well. And then when you are hearing things take place with your child, because you got to stay in the loop with your kids as well. Sometimes kids who are being bullied, they may shut down. You got to watch for those behaviors where their behaviors are starting to become a little bit abnormal from what they normally are. And then once you find out what's going on, I think it's very, very pertinent that you then go right to that school and start the conversation with the principal and getting the teachers involved as well. Now, the school is not going to tell you in terms of what action they're going to take against the bully, because that's confidential information. But you have to just be assured that the school is going to do their due diligence and make sure that there's going to be an environment where all students are successful as well. Because again, the other thing is with the bully, sometimes we want to cast them off to the pits of hell, but those kids tend to be great kids as well, but they've gone through some circumstances that have convinced them that being the bully is the best way to get the attention. So we have to kind of reframe their brains to say, hey, there's other ways you can get attention other than, putting your hands or making fun of other kids. So we want to be able to create reform where we're not simply casting those kids away either, but also making sure all kids in the environment are going to be safe.
Indeed, yeah. The bully in many ways is a victim as well, a victim of something that we may not know about. Very good. So now you made the shift to becoming a professional speaker. Tell us about that journey to becoming a speaker.
Yeah. Well, I would say before I even made that shift, I actually got fired from the job originally when I got out of college. I actually went to work with McDonald's Corporation for 2 years. I got fired from a job where I was told I didn't have leadership skills. So I went to work with McDonald's Corporation, worked there 2 years. Great job, probably one of the best jobs I ever had in my life, working in their global management training program, ended up winning their leadership award, and then went into the school system as well. So when it came to making the transition to being an entrepreneur and having a business where part of what I do is speaking, I relied on a lot of the skill sets that I had gotten from working at McDonald's Corporation. But one of the best pieces of advice I received before I jumped out there, I reached out to a number of speakers who I admired. And one of the best pieces of advice a Hall of Fame speaker had given me, Desi Williamson, I love this guy, played football for the University of Minnesota. He said, Tommy, do not just become a speaker. He said, become a businessman who does speaking. I said, wow, that's pretty profound.
Yeah.
My business is called T.A. Watson Speaking, Coaching, and Consulting. So I did not just rely on speaking. So over the years, speaking is just a part of what I do. I'm also an author. I'm also an educator. I do consulting. I do executive coaching. I have written a movie and recently became a movie producer and even became a rapper here recently as well. So,
oh, that's great.
Income, yes.
Yeah, well, we're going to look at each one of those.
Yes.
Let's talk about the movie Resilient. Is that the title of it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the movie kind of evolved from my book, A Face of Courage. A Face of Courage was a book that I written after college, mainly because I wanted to get some stuff off my chest. It wasn't because I had any expectations of the book doing well or being turned into a movie or being an award-winning book or anything like that. I just wanted to get some stuff off my chest. And in doing so, it became very, very therapeutic for me. And it became very, very helpful for other individuals who had gone through or needed some encouragement as well. But I also found that there are another segment of people out there who don't necessarily like reading books. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, how can I also get a message across to those individuals? So speaking became an opportunity for that, but also a movie. So back in 2018, I wrote a short film about my story and kind of a proof of concept of the story, produced it, and it's won 8 awards around the globe here. Now, we're currently working in a feature movie that we're looking to raise funds for and have produced next year as well. So everything started with the book, A Face of Courage, and just simply trying to, get some stuff off my shoulders. Because I believe everyone has a story to tell. And there's a lot of people out there who has stories that can sell and need to hear what it is you have to offer.
Okay, so I want to come back to Resilient, the movie. But you mentioned Face of Courage, the Tommy Watson story. So what messages did you want to convey in this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of different messages. There were the messages of the importance of family, the message of importance of having courage, facing courage. I took a civil rights class when I was in college that had a profound impact on me. Had a chance to see a lot of the struggles of leaders who were facing very, very difficult times and how they stood face to face with those individuals who were trying to take their lives and the great courage that it took for them to do that. And that's where I came up with the name for my book, A Face of Courage. But over the years, when I was writing, I thought about the relationships I had with my siblings. My siblings and I were very, very close. Our older sister, Melinda, passed away last year.
Sorry.
Cancer. but she was amazing. Even though she was a drug addict, she was an amazing factor in our lives. She was like that mother figure to us when we were kids. She was the one who stayed home with my baby sister. I went to school and everything like that. So she was amazing. My grandmother was amazing. I had a high school teacher who was amazing, Sister Brendan. So I've had a lot of folks and relationships that were very amazing out there. So there were a number of messages that were conveyed, the importance of family, the more importance of having faith and hope, because sometimes we minimize the power of hope. And again, it goes back to hope is really about what I talked about before, having a dream that supersedes your circumstances. When you can have only positive expectations, that's the acronym I use for hope, have only positive expectations, you can win. Matter of fact, there was a gentleman I was doing a course for parents in Omaha, Nebraska, who just reached out to me on Facebook. I did the course with him probably about 5 years ago. And he said, have only positive expectations. Dr. Watson, I still remember. I said, that's what I'm talking about. So when you have those moments, I want to tell people through the book that no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, you got to keep believing that things are going to get better. There are going to be some dark nights. There are going to be some valleys that are going to seem unobtainable in terms of coming out of. But you can do it. But it's a matter of taking one step at a time and having the courage to continue to believe, and then having the courage to connect with other people, because you can't do it by yourself. You got to be able to connect with other people. You got to become a dreamer. You got to go out there and get the information you need. You got to be willing to invest back in other people as you're doing it. Because sometimes when we come out of those valleys, we just say, it's all about me. But sometimes there's a person right behind you that needs some encouragement as well. So sometimes you got to take the focus off yourself and say, okay, who around me needs some of this same uplift and encouragement as well, though. So it's very, very important as you're climbing, striving to be that person that you recognize that there are other people who need help as well. So Face of Courage, I wanted to do that, but it gave me a chance to also kind of go through a lot of the things I went through in my life, and became very therapeutic to me, and also help other people in the process. So it was some healing and helping that took place as well.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that it was a therapeutic experience and that you were able to do some healing, because, there's some adult children actually who have gone through stuff in their lives with their parents, who have trouble, who carry that baggage into old age. So how did you deal with, let me throw out some words, how did you deal with forgiveness? How did you deal with compassion? And how did you heal? Especially in relationship, Dr. Watson, to your parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say my mother, we had a conversation before she passed away about 20 years ago. And I remember my mother, she had heard that I was doing a book. And she didn't necessarily want to tell me not to do the book, but she didn't necessarily encourage me to do it as well. So but she heard that we had been in foster homes. And I remember we had a conversation. She said, you hadn't been in foster homes before. And I said, whoa, are you serious?
Wow.
But the way she remembered things was, we were at home, her and my dad went out, they went to jail. She ended up retrieving us from my grandmother or my aunt. And I had to talk her through the process. I said, before we got to my grandmother and my aunt, we had to go to the crisis center or the kids' home. And then we were selected by a foster parent to go with them. And then my grandmother and my aunt would retrieve us. And then you guys would come back along. I said, we were definitely in foster homes. We went through a lot. And I think it hurt her to hear that we had gone through so much, because she was simply thinking that we were just being retrieved from that house where we were abandoned at. And my aunt and my grandmother were retrieving us. I said, there's a whole process we had to go through. But I forgave her, though. Yeah. My father, it was probably a little bit more difficult too, because all the physical violence and manipulation that took place. But I eventually got to a place where I forgave him too, because one of the things when you write a book, you have to become all the characters in the book. You don't simply write a book and the person's there to talk you through or write their piece in the book. You have to become that person. And if you're going to write a book that's going to be effective, you can't simply leave people at a place where they're hanging on all this negative stuff. You have to take them to a place which each episode is giving a lesson and an upbeat message, but continues to keep the story moving along as well. So I had to do that when I was writing the book. I couldn't simply slam my father and my mother for doing everything they were doing. Had to dive back into their backgrounds as well, because there was some things they were missing as well, that they had some gaps in their parenting that they came to the table with. No parent, no matter what their situation is, whether it be drug addict or mental health issues, no parent wants to abandon their kid and make their kid feel hopeless and not be successful in life. I think every parent who has a child wants to see their child do great. However, there's the want to, and then there's the actual skill sets that it takes to make it happen. And if you don't necessarily know how or who to connect with to get those skill sets filled, there becomes this huge gap. And unfortunately, in many situations, the kid doesn't get what they need. Yeah. But I don't think it's because the intention of the parent was to ever see the kid fail.
Right. It reminds me of something that the Reverend Jesse Jackson said back in the day. He said, you can't teach what you don't know.
Yes.
And you can't lead where you don't go.
Yes.
So, so back to Resilient, the movie. What do you, and by the way, is the movie completed now or is it still in process?
Yeah, so the short film has been completed now. The feature film, we're hoping to start production on next year. We're in the fundraising stage of it now. So if anyone is interested in being one of the funders, reach out to me at tawatson.com. But we're in the process of raising the money so we can bring on a great crew and produce a very, quality, inspirational movie that will rival Blindside and Pursuit of Happiness out there as well. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm not sure if you want to divulge this or not, but I got to ask you, who do you want to play T.A. Watson?
Well, there's a lot of great characters out there. Let me start with my mother character first, because my mother's going to play a great role in this movie. Mm-hmm. I would love to see Jennifer Hudson or Beyonce play that role. I mean,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. The one for me, I think Ice Cube's son would be a great person to get out there. A lot of young talent out there, but I'm gonna rely on my production company and my director to find those folks, because I'm not necessarily in the know with a lot of those talent that I should be knowing, but they're in the industry. So definitely would love to have Jennifer Hudson in there, and then we'll see. I was gonna say Denzel, but Denzel, it would be a much older version of me. He can't.
Right. Yeah, that's exciting. That's just hearing it. That sounds very exciting. I'm sure that motivates you, what you're doing with the story. So let me ask you this. So you mentioned Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce to play your mother. Did your mother sing?
My mother did not sing, but I thought about these two women. Jennifer Hudson is from the inner cities of Chicago. Many of the roles that she's played in the past have been very clean, great roles but this may be a role that may be very, very appealing for her to come back and play, because it's a person who she's probably grown up seeing a lot in the inner cities of Chicago. Same thing with Beyonce. It would be give them a chance to kind of expand their repertoire in terms of what they've been involved in, but also be involved in a movie of redemption, and that's inspirational. And one thing about inspirational movies, they tend to be timeless, universal, and they're transferable. So Blindside is a movie that's still talked about, you're talking about over 10 years ago, Pursuit of Happiness, same thing. Every time I see those movies, I have the same feelings of inspiration that I had the first time I actually observed it as well. So I want people to have the same feeling when they think about resilient. And when people start talking about messages of hope, I want people to say, hey, you need to go see that movie Resilient.
Yeah.
It'll get you fired up, Because one thing about the movie that's going to be quite different from the other movies, it's going to really showcase. I tell people there's a difference between growing up in poverty and growing up dealing with homelessness. And what they're going to see in the movie is what it's like to grow up being homeless in the United States of America, the richest country in the world. And you start seeing the differences. There's a big difference between growing up in poverty and growing up homeless here in America.
Yeah. And you also wrote the book, The Resilience of Champions. Yes. What do you do in this book?
Yeah. So, over the years, people always ask me, okay, what did you learn from growing up in that situation? So I picked out 6 habits of resiliency that I kind of learned and adopted over the years. Growing up in that situation, some of the other struggles I took, and they became principles for my book, The Resilience of Champions. So all 6 of them laid out. But there also comes through the stories of my time at McDonald's Corporation. McDonald's was a very integral part of my professional career, as just like I mentioned before, I had just gotten fired from a job because I didn't have leadership skills. And McDonald's was saying, hey, come on in, we will teach you those skills. So they gave me a chance to learn on the job, make errors. It taught me how to develop people, train people, run a multi-million-dollar business, all on their dime. And it just became a great source of resiliency from me, and you look at the stories of Ray Kroc. I talked about Ray Kroc and Oprah Winfrey and a number of other famous folks out there who have had to adopt these same principles in order to be successful. One of the principles I talk about over and over again in the book was the principle of sometimes when we're going through tough times, it's very, very easy to start looking at all the things that are going wrong. But in the book, I talk about in the midst of challenges, and this was amazing because I was going through a divorce at the time. I was being sued. I was in a new city. My kids were struggling. I had to use this one principle. What is the one thing that's going well right now? So sometimes when you're going through your darkest moments, you have to identify the one thing that you can hold on to. It may be as small as I'm just simply opening my eyes up every morning. That may give you the courage you need to keep taking the next steps to the next victory, to the next victory, to the next victory. Because again, what you focus on grows. So if you focus on all the negativity around you, it's going to simply grow. So focus on the one thing that's going right. That one thing becomes two things, becomes three things, becomes eventually four things. And before you know it, you're not even focusing on the things that aren't going well anymore. You're focusing simply on what's going right. And I tell people, it's a matter of being deciding in life, are you going to be the thermostat or the thermometer? so the thermometer kind of adjusts and becomes whatever environment it is. So if negativity is going on around you, things aren't going well, you focus on those things. But thermostat says, hey, I'm going to set the tone. I'm not going for that. I'm going to have a dream bigger than this right here. I'm going to keep going. If you're going to be in my life, here's what you're going to talk about. Here's what you're going to dream about. Here's what you're going to focus on. And you just become that person to get to your goals and dreams. So that's what I had to do in those moments. And that's what Resilience of Champions kind of pushes people to do. Say, hey, if you're going to become a great leader of an organization, you got to dream beyond your circumstance. You're going to become a great leader of your own individual life. You got to become a great leader and dreamer beyond your circumstances. Absolutely.
That's fantastic. That kind of reminds me, and I want you to reflect on this for me, of a book title of Dr. Robert Schuller, Sr. And the title of the book is Tough Times Don't Last, Tough People Do. Absolutely. Does that title resonate with you in any way, Dr. Watson?
Absolutely. You know, I'm a big fan that sometimes we learn more from adversity than we do from winning. And in the game of sports, when we take the NFL, for example, most teams want to lose before they get to the playoffs. Because simply winning, going through a whole season undefeated, sets you up to be unsuccessful when you get to the playoffs. One of the great things that happens when you're losing, in most situations, you should be learning. Yes. So when you ask yourself, what am I learning from this situation? What am I learning from this situation? It gives you a chance to get better. Okay. So those people we call tough people, those tough times, they're usually asking the question, what did I learn from the situation? What can I do better? What am I going to do differently next time? So it sets you up to be stronger and more resilient. Yeah. Think about our plight as African Americans in this country. I compare it to two people running a race. You have one person, you know, they're on their side of the race. They get a chance to have a straight shot to the finish line. Yeah. Okay. The other person has to go through an Ironman course. We have to jump over barbed wire, gun under fences, jump over crocodiles, run through mud. The person who had it easy, what did they learn from their journey? Probably not much. Yeah. The person who had to jump over the wires and go into the other things, they became a lot stronger and more resilient. So there's a resiliency that is built from trials and tribulations that you have to learn to embrace, because once you get to victory, if you don't know how to look back and say, wow, I remember when I was in that valley, I learned this, this, and this. Your ability to sustain success becomes very dwindled down. That's why a lot of people who win the lottery and all those things like that don't keep the money long, because they didn't go through a process of trials and tribulations to obtain it. They just simply, lose it. But when you go through trials and tribulations, you definitely have the grit to keep it.
Yeah, the lottery mindset, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
One last question for you. When did the moniker Dr. Inspiration come your way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So well before I became a doctor, I began to, it goes back to the piece about dreaming. So I'm in the movie industry, and there was a study done by researchers on the brains of actors. And what they said was they hooked up MRI machines to the brains of actors. And what they found was that when the actors were in character, their brains actually changed. They became someone else, not just physically, but mentally as well. So when I began to call myself Dr. Inspiration, I became that doctor well before I physically had the title. So there is something great that takes place when you begin to speak it into existence. The Bible says the power of life and death is in the tongue. That is literally so true, because what we speak, we're going to become. And when you look at one of the principles, there are a lot of principles that successful people have in common, but the most common principle that's shared among successful people is they all believe that they could be, they all visualize themselves already obtaining their level of success before it ever came to fruition physically. So mentally, they were already there. They experienced it every day. They would see it every day. They would smell it every day, even though it wasn't there physically. So by the time it became physical, they had already been there in that process, and it became a situation of backwards design. So I began to call myself doctor well before I actually had the physical title. I was doctor 10 years prior to that. So Doctor Inspiration was my route. Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Inspiration, this is a great place to stop. I just want to thank you for sitting with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I appreciate you having me. And again, for those folks that are listening, remember, victory always goes to the person who's stayed strong enough, long enough. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop believing in your dreams. Dream bigger than your circumstances. Remember that success and failure are a circle. They are not opposites. You need both to succeed and do well.
Fantastic. There you have it. You've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Our guest today has been Dr. Tommy Watson, aka Dr. Inspiration. Until next time, good day.